start with wide field fluorescence microscopy. So, in this course, I will be a little theoretical, so I hope you know about Fourier transforms and convolution, and that's the basis notion that you need to understand this course. Okay, so in a wide field fluorescence microscopy, you have a sample which is stained by fluorophores. Here you have 2 fluorophores. And it is illuminated with a uniform illumination, and then the emitted light by the fluorophores goes through the objective, through the tube lens, and you get spot on the camera. So what is important here is that from what you have at the object plane here are those 2 fluorophores, and at the image plane you have those 2 spots. And you see that those spots are much bigger than the fluorophore because the light emitted by the fluorophore cannot be focused under the lambda over 2, where lambda is the wavelength of the emitted light. So in this course, I will talk about the linear fluorescence regime, which means that the light emitted by the fluorophore is proportional to the intensity of the incident illumination on this fluorophore. Okay, so it's a linear fluorescence regime, and it is nice, this regime, because it works well for small powers of incident light, basically smaller than 500 watt per centimeter square. So it is the regime where usually you are not too toxic. Okay, and it works also for standard fluorophore, like GFP, for example. You don't need complicated fluorophore. Okay, so it's the most widespread fluorescence regime that is used in microscopy presently. Okay, so the problem is that you cannot focus light below lambda over 2 volume, because this is physics, okay? So there is nothing you can do about it. So what does it mean? It means that when you have an image on a camera, this image of the camera, the smallest feature that you can get is given by this little spot here. And in the Fourier space, what does it mean? It means that if you do a Fourier transform of this image, it will have a support that is restricted to a disk of radius 2 over lambda. When I say 2 over lambda, I have omitted the numerical aperture because I'm doing theory, okay? So Ni is equal to 1, okay? Numerical aperture. So this is the important point. So whatever the system you use, the image that you get on a camera, is always frequency limited to a frequency cutoff that I call nu h here, because h is what I call the point spread function, which is 2 over lambda. And if you look now at the way you can write the intensity recorded on the image plane, what is the relationship? This is a question you should always ask yourself. What is the relationship between the image and the object that you're looking at? Usually you don't ask this question because you think it's straightforward. Actually, it's not straightforward at all. So it's very nice to know the relationship between the image and the object. And here, the relationship between the image and the object is given by this formula. You see that the image is the sum of the spots created by those fluorophores, and it can be written in a mathematical form as the convolution of the fluorescence density here, which is basically the fluorophore concentration times the brightness of the fluorophore, convolution of the fluorescence density with a point spread function, which is actually the spot, the image of one fluorophore. And the point spread function, the Fourier transform of the point spread function is called usually the optical transfer function, and it is frequency limited. There is a cutoff frequency, which I will call nu h. Okay, so there's nothing you can do. As soon as you have recorded an image, this image is frequency limited to nu h. So of course, if you have closer and closer fluorophore, you won't be able to distinguish them after a certain limit. So what is the only way under this regime of linear fluorescence, the linear fluorescence regime, what is the only way to have a better resolution? Well, you cannot play on the collection because on the camera, it's frequency limited to new edge. You can only play on the excitation of the fluorophore, okay? And this excitation, you can changing either by taking inhomogeneous illumination or by changing the activation of the fluorophore with chemical process and nice fluorophore. And in this course, we will focus only on the techniques where you change the illumination and you use structured illumination. So what happens when you use inhomogeneous illumination now? Well, let's say that you have here a sample which is represented by its fluorescence density, fluorophore concentration times the brightness. And this function is defined at a macroscopic scale, which means it is averaged over volumes over 1,000 nanometer cube, okay? Because the intensity, the field intensity, it's also a macroscopic field, okay? Because we have washed out the microscopic fluctuation in this model, okay? So it's not at all the same framework as the single molecule and all these other techniques. So, okay, so this is the object with its fluorescence density. This is the illumination. And here you see that the illumination illuminates the fluorescence density over here, and it creates some image here. And the image can be written as the convolution by edge, always, of the fluorescence density times the illumination, okay? So this is the very important equation that you should remember when you're doing structured illumination microscopy. And we are going to see what happens when you Fourier transform this image. So of course this image, it is still frequency limited to nu h, okay? To the frequency cutoff of the point spread function. So when you do the Fourier transform of this image, what do you get? You get, of course, the optical transfer function here, which cuts the spatial frequency of your image to nu h. And here you have the convolution between rho, between your sample density rho, and the illumination. So visually, what does it mean? If this is the frequency support of h, the point spread function, and if this green disk is the frequency support of the illumination, the frequency support of the image is the same as this one, okay? You agree with that. You take one frequency here on the image. This frequency will depend on the frequency of the object over a disk of radius nu e that is centered about this frequency here, okay? So this is the only thing you have to know and to explain super resolution in structured illumination microscopy. The frequency of this image, the frequency of the image are related to the frequency of the object up to nu e plus nu h, where nu e here is the frequency cutoff of the illumination. Okay? So the big issue of structural illumination, it is how can you recover from this image the frequency of the sample over this huge domain? Of course, you understand right away that if you have only one image, the information is limited to this small disk. There is no way you can recover the information of the object over this huge disk. So you need multiple images. This is why all super resolved microscopy techniques require multiple images. Sometimes they are hidden. You don't see them because you have a pinhole, but in fact, you have multiple images. What does it mean you have multiple images? It means that you have multiple illumination. Okay? Multiple illumination. Okay. So, okay. Okay. So, the simplest way to do structured illumination microscopy is to use a structured illumination, which is a focused beam. A focused beam is a structured illumination. Okay? And the focused beam, it's Fourier transform onto this object plane here. It is the same. It is a disk. Okay, it is a disk with a frequency which is at best frequency cutoff 2 over lambda prime, where lambda prime is the wavelength of illumination. Okay, so this is what you've got. And of course, you need multiple illumination. So what do you do when you use a focus beam? You scan the focus beam, which amounts to taking many images with many illuminations. So you scan it over your sample. So you see that I've changed a little the focus of my beam. So in this case, here is I recall the image formation model. So you have the image at R ops, so the intensity measured at R ops, which depends on the position of focalization of the beam, which can be written as the fluorescence density times the illumination, which is always the same but translated. So it's E of x minus R fog, and convolved with my point spread function. Okay, so you have many, many images. What can you do with that? What can you do with that? Well, the first, okay, so those are the images that are related to the focus beam, to the position of the focus beam. You see, it changes. And here I've taken two fluorophores that are separated by 0.4 lambda, so it's below the usual lambda over 2 limit. Okay, but you see the image is different as a function of the focus position. Okay, so what happened? What can you do with those three images? Well, the easiest thing that is done is usually you focus your beam here at R fog, and here you place a unique detector. So you integrate all the intensity. So it means that this is the image that you've got when you focus here, and you integrate all the intensity, and you place your point here. And then you do this for all the position of your focus, okay? So you place your focus. And this builds an image that you can model in this way, which is the integration of your image R ops, R fog, d R ops, where you integrate over the position of observation here. And of course, this image can be modeled much easily in this way. And what does it mean? It means that you obtain an image that is the convolution of your fluorescence density and a point spread function, which is now your illuminating spot, okay? So this is the classical standard scanning microscope where you have a unique detector, and the only thing that you've learned here is that you will have a resolution that is dictated by the width of the illuminating spot focus beam, which is something you had understood right away. And if the Stokes shift is negligible, if lambda is equal to lambda prime, the scanning fluorescence microscope is exactly equivalent to a wide field fluorescence microscope. Okay? So it's a nice way to understand also wide field fluorescence microscope. Okay, it's a unique detector. Of course, you can do better. It's too bad to remove all the information that is contained in the different images, no? It's too bad. Okay, so now, instead of integrating the intensity at each focus pulse, you can take the intensity exactly at the position of the focus, okay? So here is the position of the focus for the first image, position of the focus for the second, position of the focus for the third image. In this case, you build your image in this way. So you're taking your, I would say, your super resolved image is the low resolution image, R fog, okay? This is the important point. And when you look at this, well, you see that it will be the fluorescence density convolved with a point spread function, which is the product of the illumination and the collection point spread function, okay? And this is very nice because the support in the Fourier space of this product is nu E plus nu H, the frequency cutoff of the illumination plus the frequency cutoff of the observation point spread function. What does it mean? It means that this technique gives you the best image, the best super resolved image you can get within this framework. Okay, you have access to the Fourier to the spatial frequency of the fluorescence density up to nu H plus nu E. And this is the confocal microscope. So the confocal microscope is the best you can get, okay, in structured illumination microscopy. Why? Why there is a problem? There is a problem because when you take the intensity at this pixel which corresponds to the focus post, you have no photon. So, okay, so it was nice idea, but it fails because you have no photon, well, 1 or 2 photons, and so it's very noisy, and so it's a pain. And so instead of taking the intensity at this place very precisely, you integrate the intensity over an airy disk, you know, over a large pinhole, and as soon as you start integrating, you are coming back toward the scanning microscope. So it's a compromise. Okay, it's a compromise between the number of photons that you've got and the resolution that you hope. It's a compromise, but of course I'm doing only theory. Ideally, it's the best. Okay. There is another technique that you must have known. It's called image scanning microscope, ISM. I don't know, it's Eriscan. It's usually an add-on that is put on confocal microscopes. And ISM, the aim of this technique was really to avoid this problem of photons, the fact that you don't have a lot of photons in a confocal microscope. So the image, the idea, the process that the image processing that they apply is what we call pixel reassignment. And basically, it amounts to say, okay, I'm not going to take only the intensity here, but I will also take the intensity at R minus at, if I'm looking at the intensity that I want to put on my super resolved image at R, I will take the intensity at R, of course, and at R minus A when the beam is focused at R plus A. So it's quite weird. I think it's weird. It's Colin Shepard that has invented this in 1980, and this guy is so bright. It's very surprising. Nobody would have thought about this, okay, except Colin, and then Underline, who found it again in 2009. Okay, so they do that, and they are very happy about this. But if you calculate this, you notice that you can write your image as the fluorescence density convolved with the super resolved point spread function, and the super resolved point spread function is not the product of E and H as for the confocal microscope. It is the convolution of the illumination with the point spread function. So the convolution is much wider, okay, but shrunk by a factor of 2. That's the result. And what happened is that the Fourier spectrum, the Fourier support of this point spread function, super resolved point spread function, is 2 times the minimum between nu H and nu E. So actually, it's not as good as ideal confocal. But in practice, it's better because you have photons, okay? Well, this is the ideal ESM where you really integrate for all A. And then they do something different because actually it's not that good. They have to reduce the size of integration here. Okay, so the problem with those, so we have seen the scanning techniques. For the scanning techniques, you need to get a lot of images, okay, especially for ESM. So you have a lot of images because you scan your focused beam. So there are many other techniques that have been derived. For example, the multi-point ISM, image scanning microscope, so that you have less images here because you have a periodic grid, and so you scan over less points because only over the period of your periodic grid. And at the limit, this here could be seen as the limit of this. If you take the smallest possible grid here with the smallest possible period, lambda over 2, you are recovering the periodic structured illumination microscopy, okay? And in this case, you need very few images because the period is so small. And here you need more imaging, okay? So and always, you always have the same illumination, the same model for each low resolution image. And I just say one word about periodic structured illumination microscopy. In this case, you need very few images, 3 only. You translate your grid 3 times, you rotate it, etc., etc. You have a numerical reconstruction, and in the end, you are able to recover your image as the fluorescence density convolved with the super resolved point spread function, and the super resolved point spread function is h times the sum of your illumination that have been centered, and so you recover the spatial frequency of the object up to nu h plus nu e. It's perfect. It's very nice. So it's like confocal microscopy, ideally. Okay, but you have more photon. Okay, because you are illuminating the whole system, so it's a wide field system. You have more photon, and it's perfect. Everybody is happy, and this is why it has you can buy those commercial setup. Okay, so to summarize structured illumination microscopy, I would say basically you have 2 techniques with the scanning spot and with the periodic light grid, and you are able to recover an image which is the convolution of your sample fluorescence density with a super resolved point spread function. And at best, the Fourier support of the point spread function is nu h plus nu e, and it is equivalent to the Fourier support of h, your point spread function, and e, your illumination. Okay? So I am the last speaker. So I will take advantage of this, and I had the problems. So and I'm doing a very fundamental course. So I will take this advantage to maybe be a little longer. No? Yes. Okay. So what? So now you're quite convinced about the interest of structured illumination microscopy, and you know that it's quite easy from a fundamental point of view, and you know that it is linear in the object, in the fluorescence density. What does it mean that an image is linear with respect to the sample? It means that if you do the image of 2 objects, it is equal to the sum of the image that you would have obtained if each object was taken separately. Okay? That's nice. That's not always the case, I can tell you. That's not always the case. So, but what is the issue of those techniques? It requires the control of the illumination. Okay? It requires to know where you're focused. It requires that you focus the best possible. And in particular for SIM, periodic structured illumination microscopy, it requires the knowledge of the light grid parameters. So this kind of technique is quite sensitive to the illumination deformation and to some inaccurate estimation of the illumination. Okay? And this is particularly visible in SIM. If you have a bad estimation of the period of the light grid or of its position, you have some artifacts that appear which make biology look like honeycomb structures. So they're always honeycomb structure. It's not good. Okay, and it's no, but I'm laughing, but this is true. I mean. You do a lot of SIM measurement, and honeycomb structured as usual. So, God wanted this. Okay, so you have to be careful with that. And also, if you have a distorted periodic grid because of aberration within the sample, well, you can have a reconstruction that is completely different from what you would have if the light grid was not distorted. So you don't see honeycomb structure, but you don't know what you're seeing anyway. So that's the big issue, especially in SIM. It's not as crucial in ISM and confocal because basically you are illuminating with a potato, and a potato is always a potato. Okay, so it's a... Okay, so now I want to enter my second part of the talk. You have time. So this was the course. Now I'm talking about what we have done with the group. So the people that worked in this group are scattered over 3 labs in France. So it's CBI at Toulouse, LS2N at Nantes, and Fresnel Institute in Marseille. So it's really a collaborative work. So this, in the last 10 years, we have decided to, because we were very bad experimentalists, we have decided to replace the periodic pattern with completely random pattern. Because this was the experimental setup we had to do for periodic pattern. It never worked, okay? It was in total internal reflection. We could never get one image. It was always over honeycomb stuff. Okay, so we decided to replace this by a diffuser because, okay, so it's a diffuser and we send, so we shine this diffuser with a laser and we create this awful pattern, and we were very happy. And this was working. I mean, it was working, the experiment at least. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this technique, which is called random illumination microscopy, and which is meant for persons that have problems in doing experiments, okay? Okay, so what is the principle? The principle of this technique is the following. Let's say you have your object here, it's a star, fluorescence density, and you illuminate it with a lot of random speckles. Those speckles are completely unknown, and they come from a diffuser, and you have multiple of them. And so you obtain multiple speckled images, which are, of course, rho times the speckle convolved by h. So you have many images, low-resolution images. You know that each of those speckled images depends on the sample frequency up to nu h plus nu e. And this is the first part of the course. But each speckled image is frequency limited to nu h. Okay. So the problem was, we don't know the speckle pattern. Can we form a super resolved image from those multiple low-resolution images in the form, the fluorescence density convolved with the point spread function that is super resolved? So we want to keep the linearity, the wonderful linearity to the object of structured illumination microscopy. And we want to get some super resolution. Okay, so the problem is that we don't know the speckle pattern, so we cannot use the techniques in classical structured illumination microscopy. But there is something that we know. Those speckles are what we call fully developed speckles, and there is a huge book by Goodman about it. And those speckles, we don't know anything about the pattern, but we know everything about the statistics. We know the average of those speckles, it's uniform. So if you sum all those speckles, it will be uniform. And we know the covariance, which is the autocorrelation of the speckles, and it's perfectly well known when they are fully developed. So we are going to play on the statistics of those speckled images. So the first thing we can do is the average. We can sum the average. We can sum those low-resolution images. So it's the sum of the images. And if we model this, when you sum the images, it is as if you were summing the speckled, the illumination. The speckle is homogeneous, and in the end, you have the average of your speckled image, which can be written as your fluorescence density convolved with the point spread function times here the average of the field. And the average of the field is a constant, so you have done a wonderful wide field microscope in a very long time because you had to record a lot of different speckles. Okay? This comes from the fact that the sum of the speckle, when you illuminate with speckle and you sum all those speckles, you will have a uniform homogeneous illumination in the end, if you have enough speckle. Okay, so this is not a good idea. But you see that taking the average of the images, you have removed the necessity to know each speckle pattern, because you have replaced the speckle pattern by the average of the speckle pattern that you know. So now let's do something else. Let's do the variance of the images. So if you do the variance of the images, you have to take each image, square it, sum them, and then remove the average, square. Okay? So this is the way you build the empirical variance of the images. And if you do the theoretical model, you see that all the speckle patterns disappear, and they are replaced by a function which is the autocorrelation of the speckle. Okay? So this is the model that links the variance to the fluorescence density. And what do you see? Because now you have the eye. You see that it is not linearly linked to the object. Okay? The object, rho, it appears twice here. It is quadratically linked to the object. So in this case, if you do it like this, I mean, in a very simple way, the variance of two objects is not the sum of the variance of each object taken separately. Okay? So we have to be careful. But, okay, it's not quadratically linked, but we don't have to know the speckle pattern. We just need to know the autocorrelation of the speckle. And by the way, the autocorrelation of the speckle is very close to the point spread function when the speckles are formed through the same objective as the collection objective. Okay? It's exactly the same if there is no stock shift. Okay. So, now, what can we expect from this variance? So, here I want just to give you a hint of the way we have thought about this. We have this quadratic function between the variance and the sample, and we want to know if from this variance we will be able to recover the spatial frequency of the object up to a certain limit. So what is the problem we are confronted to? First of all, the variance, you have to understand, it is frequency limited. If you take the Fourier transform of your variance, it is frequency limited. What is the frequency cutoff of the Fourier transform of the variance? The variance is related to the square of the image. When you have an image that is frequency limited to nu h, the square of the image is frequency limited to 2 nu h. This is why sometimes you have super resolution by just taking the image to the power of 10. It will be 10 nu h, but of course it's not super resolution. Huh? Of course not. It's just okay. So the variance, as it is related to the square of the image, it will be frequency limited to 2 nu h, okay? So now, if we take the Fourier transform of the variance, we have a huge disk which goes up to 2 nu h. But you know that each speckled image depends on the spatial frequency of the object up to nu h plus nu e. You remember? This comes from the beginning. Okay, so would it be possible that from this Fourier support of 2 nu h, we are able to recover the spatial frequencies of the sample up to nu h and nu e? The question? Yes, only if nu h is equal to nu e. In this case, the variance is frequency limited to 2 nu h, and it depends on the sample frequency up to 2 nu h also. And c'est de la magie, it's magic. There is a bijection between the variance, the Fourier transform of the variance, and the Fourier transform of the sample up to nu h plus nu e. But this is so I'm telling you that, but I'm not going to demonstrate it because I don't have a blackboard. Okay, so I cannot because I have to write it down. But it's you have to believe me. But it's wonderful, no? Okay, it's quite wonderful to see that because it was not plain. I mean, it was not trivial. So, indeed, from the variance, there is a bijection between the variance of the image and the sample up to nu h to 2 nu h. But, of course, it's not a one-to-one correspondence, very simple. It's not one frequency of the variance, which is equivalent to one frequency, to the frequency at the same place for the object. So you need to untangle. It's a one-to-one correspondence that is not simple, okay? So we need an algorithm to algorithm the sample frequency from the variance frequencies, okay? It's a bijection, but it's not a trivial bijection. And so we have developed, and this is the work of Simon, who will give some workshop later in the week. Simon developed an algorithm which is able to estimate iteratively rho so as to minimize the experimental variance and the theoretical variance. And when this estimate is converged, we are sure that we have been able to recover the sample up to nu h plus nu e. So here is an example of what is the average, the estimated rho when you do the average, and this is the estimated rho when you use the variance. OK. 5 minutes. Oui, mais pour des raisons évidentes. No, I still have some 20 minutes. So, OK. So what are the? So now I'm going to advertise RIM, OK? Because I want you to look at the workshop by Simon and Thomas Manja and Léa Costes on Wednesday at 16 o'clock, 16 o'clock. And OK, so what are the assets of RIM? The first, well, theoretically, it's nice. You have a linear relationship between your object and the image, OK? Up to nu h to nu h. This is nice from a theoretical point of view. Very nice. It's much easier to do, OK? And it's very easy to change colors and change objective because the speckle, I mean, you take a diffuser, red, light, green, it gives you red and green and blue. The same diffuser works and you have speckles. So you don't have to change anything. You don't have to change. When you change your objective, you don't have to calibrate again. I mean, it's really easy. OK? And very important, it's robust to aberration on the illumination side because the speckle, it's random wave, OK? It's completely random. And if you have aberration, it's even more random, and more random than random is random, OK? So in the end, the speckle autocorrelation is very robust to aberrations, OK? It's always the same, so you can really misalign your experimental setup, use very bad objective. OK, but the problem is that you have the collection point spread function, which in this case you still need to have in a proper way. So it's not that good. And so this is some example to show you how good it is. It's very good. It's very good because, look, those are the, I don't know, the Argolite stuff, lines. And look, you almost, with the faith, a lot of faith, you can see the 60 nanometer. So this is in a tear frame. So 1.49 numerical aperture. So it's very good. What is really, I think, nice for biologists here is when you want to do high throughput screening. So you have many, many samples to do. RIM always work. Whereas, if you use SIM, sometimes you've got, honeycomb structure. So it's much more robust. OK? OK, so I still have some time, to talk about, because you wanted this, to talk about three-dimensional microscopy. Because I've just, all the previous part was on really two-dimensional microscopy, but you want to know about three-dimensional microscopy. But of course, if you don't want, you can leave and eat. But OK, so three-dimensional microscopy, what is the simplest way to do it? Well, it's simple. It's just you move the sample, OK? So you move the sample. And so you have a pile of two-dimensional images, and you build the three-dimensional images by piling those different images that are taken for different positions of your sample. OK. So if you use wide field, confocal, or image scanning microscopy techniques, and you do this, you translate the sample, you can show very easily that the three-dimensional imaging that you obtain by piling those different reconstructions can be written as the three-dimensional object convolved with a three-dimensional point spread function. OK? And for the wide field imaging, the three-dimensional point spread function has basically this shape here. For the confocal, ideal confocal, it is the square of the wide field three-dimensional point spread function. And for the ESM, it's the, let's say it's a particular ESM that I have derived here. It is the convolution of the wide field three-dimensional point spread function that has been shrunk by a factor of 2. So let's have just an idea of what you can get this is all theory. It's a little MATLAB code that I've just done. So let's say that you have an object, three-dimensional object, which is made of a big bead, small scattered fluorophore here, and two plane in the two planar fluorescent, like a Stabilo boss on a cover slip. Okay, so it's a planar fluorescence here. So if you look at the white field, this is an en face image, and this is the XZ cut. Well, you can see the scattered fluorophore, so you cut over there, okay, just in the middle here, at the middle of the big bead. You see the big bead, you see the small scattered fluorophore, and if you look at the XZ cut, you see the big bead, you see the small scattered fluorophore, and the two planes have disappeared because there is no optical sectioning in wide field fluorescence microscopy. Actually, all the fluorescence coming from those planes has been spread over the whole image, and the en face image, and this is why you have a lack of contrast. This is the main issue of wide field microscopy. If there was optical sectioning, everybody would be very much happier. Okay, so if you look now at the confocal, what is the main interest of confocal? It's not the transverse resolution. It is that confocal is able to see here the two planes. Confocal microscopy is doing optical sectioning. You see the contrast is much better because the fluorescence coming from the plane is limited to the position of the plane. It does not go and pollute your image that is taken here. You are taking an image here, and you have access, and the fluorescence emitted by the plane here is not seen. Okay, so this is the big interest of confocal microscopy. ESM, it's different. You have a much better resolution here. You don't see it because it is washed out by the lack of contrast due to the fluorescent plane. You don't see the fluorescent plane. ESM, the Eriscan technique, when it is done with a huge detector, there is no optical sectioning. So you're losing one of the main interests of confocal microscopy, but you can, with some trade-off, you can recover some optical sectioning by taking a small camera and not a big camera when you do your pixel reassignment. Okay, so what about RIM? Well, but RIM, so no, sorry, I just want to give you a little hint of what it means, optical sectioning, and not what optical sectioning. This is the point spread function of your wide field fluorescence, wide field point spread function. And the Fourier transform in the x, y, z direction of this point spread function has this torus-like shape, and it has no frequency along the optical axis. And this is why, along the z-axis, this is why you are not able to see any fluorescent plane with a wide field microscope. Okay? So you're never able to locate a fluorescence plane. So do the experiment. You put a cover slip with a Stabilo boss, and you move it through the focal plane, and you see always the same image. It's a uniform white image, because there is no frequency along the optical axis. The confocal, of course, the support is the support of the square of the wide field point spread function, and so it is the convolution of this torus with itself, and so it gives you a big galette, which now has spatial frequency along the optical axis, so you are able to see the fluorescent plane. And the ESM, I mean the image scanning microscopy, it is just the dilatation of this domain by a factor of 2, and you still don't have any frequency along the optical axis. So there is no optical sectioning in this case, okay? So what about RIM? Well, RIM, it's very simple. RIM, the Fourier support in 3D of your speckle is exactly the same, if there is no stock shift, as the Fourier support of the 3D point spread function. So our theorem applies, okay? It means that we are able to recover the object spatial frequency up to this enlarged confocal domain, okay? So RIM exhibits the same behavior as an ideal confocal microscope, but we have photon, because it's a wide field image, okay? So I don't want to show you too much So it works, of course, with a 3D dense sample and with a resolution which is about 300 nanometer in Z and 100 nanometer in X, in the transverse plane. It works for sparse sample, and this is on a live bacteria. We are looking at the mitosis, I don't know, we call this mitosis, and we are looking at this Z ring. So I don't know what I'm talking about, okay? So it's an annulus, okay. And this annulus pops into two, it's a ring, okay? And okay, so you can see those little, so you can see those three annulus. This is the first annulus here, then it decays and disappears, and then you have the apparition of two other annulus. We are very happy. And this is in XZ, and okay, so we have, and you see the size here, 500 nanometers, so it's very small. It's very small, so you can do a lot of things, even in this macroscopic regime, okay, with fluorescence density stuff. And there is no deep learning, there is nothing. There is just a convolution, okay. Okay, so this is a 3D reconstruction of a big object, so it works also on huge object. And that's it. So I'm perfect, no? No, I do my conclusion. No, I do my conclusion. No. Okay, so. Thank you. So my conclusion first. So it's very long. It's a very long conclusion. No, I wanted. Okay, so this is the way to advertise RIM. So of course, I'm like an ambassador for RIM. So I'm telling you all the asset of RIM. Okay, there is also drawbacks. And it's written in green, so you cannot read it very well. So so one of the drawbacks is that for the moment, RIM uses 100 to 200 speckled image. Why? Because we need to do statistics, okay? And those statistics, empiric statistics, they have to be close to the asymptotic statistics, 100 to 200 images. Okay, so temporal resolution, because we have to record those images. But we are working on this, and I think the last, okay, so we are working on this, and we are improving this issue. For the moment, let's say, published stuff, we had 10 Hertz at best, on not very big field of view, of course, because we need to use a camera that goes very fast in order to record our 100 of images. And so it's a small field of view, let's say 10 micron by 10 micron. Okay, so, but we still had 10 Hertz, which is not bad. Why is it not bad? It's because we can take a very small integration time, because what is important is the total photon budget. So we can have the same photon budget as SIM, okay? So SIM, it needs to take a longer integration time because it has only 9 images, and so it needs photon over those 9 images. But in our case, our raw images are very bad, but we have many of them, and in the end, what counts is the total photon budget. Okay, but 10 Hertz is not that good still. There is another problem. It is that, contrary to confocal, we are collecting all the photons that come back from the object. And if the sample is very densely stained, of course, we will have photons coming from the out-of-focus planes. We still have optical sectioning, but we have optical sectioning only if we are able to form the variance of those images, and that the variance of the images coming from the signal, from the modification of the speckle, is bigger than the variance coming from the Poisson noise of the background. So this is subtle, but it's a limitation, and you don't have this in confocal. So that's why confocal, I think it's the best technique ever. And that's why it is used, actually, most of the time. And why? Because it's time.
No. It's automatic. It's not prepared for such a long presentation.
No, but it's okay. It's okay. So,
I'm joking.
No, but so this is an important point. Okay, it's an important point. So, and of course, also we are illuminating the whole sample. So it's not like light sheet microscopy. regions of the sample we are not interested in are still illuminated, and so there is still a little toxicity. Okay, so this is another drawback. And also, of course, we are also sensitive to aberration on the collection side. We need to have a good observation point spread function. So those are the three drawbacks of RIM. And we are working on this to improve this, but still. So now, just to conclude, really, you can participate to the RIM workshop with Thomas Manja, Léa Costet, and Simon Labois. So they are coming from the CBI Toulouse, Wednesday at 4:10, 16h10, and Thursday at 14h. Okay? And we are most welcome to come.
You haven't told us what is the diffuser made of. And
Okay, so the diffuser in Fresnel, it was something we buy at Torlab, diffuser with a numerical, so there is an angular, so it was like 1 degree.
okay,
And what is used at the CBI, it's a SLM.
okay,
It's a SLM where you plot a pattern with a random, it's a binary SLM where you plot a pattern of random white and 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1
all right,
at random.
okay.
Yeah.
Theoretical questions for the hardcore users.
I was wondering if it would be advantageous to use the knowledge of the pattern. Like if you split or if you detect by transmission exactly each pattern, could you use that to go faster or need less because you would know exactly when to stop or things like that?
If you do this, you are doing classical structured illumination microscopy. So of course it's very nice. You can have less sample, you can have less patterns because you can optimize the patterns so that they cover, they illuminate homogeneously the sample. With only 3 patterns, for example, in structured illumination microscopy, you need only 3 positions of the light grid, and you have an homogeneous illumination. But you are coming back to the issue of mastering the patterns, of controlling the patterns, and you never know how you illuminate your sample, because even if you have a camera, the pattern goes into the sample and it is distorted by the sample. And so what you get on your camera is what you send, but it is not what is inside the sample. So the interest of RIM is that the speckle goes into the sample, it is distorted by the sample, but we don't care because it's already very bad, so it cannot be much worse, you know.
Okay, so I have another idea. Can you generate sub-diffraction speckle by putting something on the cover slip?
Exactly. So this is a very good question. You can do that. But in this case, if you use, and this is, I think this is nice maybe to point this out. If you use a sub-diffraction speckle, for example, an evanescent speckle that would be created by a rough surface, okay, why not? In this case, nu E, the frequency cutoff of your speckle, is much higher than nu H, the frequency cutoff of your observation point spread function. And in this case, you are trying to recover the sample spatial frequency up to nu H plus nu E from a variance which is frequency limited to 2 nu H. It does not work. So maybe we could do this if we were not working only on the variance, but on the variance and on the third order moment, and etc. But for the moment, with the variance, I can tell you, if nu E is much smaller than nu H, you do not have access to the sample spatial frequency up to 2 nu H because of lack of information. I mean, it's an information problem. I just want to show you that. You have your image, it's frequency limited to 2 nu H. You cannot expect to get information over nu H plus nu E, which is much bigger than 2 nu H, okay? There is a lack of information. Except if you use regularization, except if you use a priori information on the sample. And this is basically what is done in super resolved SMLM techniques. You use a priori information on the object.